Hello and welcome to Route 99. This is DPM043. Here we have a 556 word long passage. It is from the humanities genre. It talks something about insight. Let's read the passage, understand what this is about. Let's try to answer the question that follows. Right. Insight is often defined as sudden change in or the formation of a concept. So either it is a change in a concept or a formation of a concept or other type of knowledge representation, often leading to the solution of a problem. So either it's a change in the concept or the formation of a concept which leads to solution of a problem. These changes are thought to have certain attributes. For example, insights are frequently accompanied by a burst of emotion, including a highly positive surprise at either of the content or the manner of realization. In contrast, analytical solutions are not typically accompanied by an emotional response, except perhaps for a sense of satisfaction resulting from completing the task. So these insights, the problem solved from insights, has certain attributes. One of this attribute is a feeling of a burst of positive emotion. Either it is a positive surprise or a content like satisfaction or a manner of realization, that is that sort of burst of emotion. But in contrast to analytical solutions which are not based on insights, does not has such positive burst of emotion, they might not follow such burst of emotion, right? There is maybe at the best some form of satisfaction, but there is no positive burst of emotion as in the case of insight. However, though not an unusual concomitant, a conscious emotional response is not necessary feature of insight. So it is not necessary that insight would always follow a positive burst of emotion, but maybe it is in the majority of the case. Participants in many studies have solved dozens of verbal puzzles with insight without reports of multiple bursts of emotion. So there has been studies where people have solved problems through insight, but there hasn't been much burst of emotion. Another feature is that insight often breaks an impasse or mental block produced because a solver initially fixated on an incorrect solution strategy or strong but ultimately unhelpful association of a problem. So it also cleared impasse or a mental block, because maybe initially a solver is stuck on an incorrect solution which may seems very close to the problem but is ultimately unhelpful, right? So it also clears an impasse or a mental block. The breaking of an impasse is accompanied by an reinterpretation or restructuring of problem to reveal a new, often simple solution to solution strategy. So this breaking of impasse is how it is done. So your problem is reinterpreted or it is restructured, which reveals a new or simple solution to the problem, which is basically insight. So when you restructure, when you reinterpret something, it reveals an insight. Some researchers implicitly consider problem restructuring and the breaking of an impasse to be defining feature of insight. So some people also say that this is the very defining feature of insight, this restructuring and reinterpreting. However, this views exclude prominent types of insight such as those that occur. So this view says that this is the basic way you can gain an insight. You restructure things. But the author says that no, there are other ways of gaining an insight as well, like when the solution suddenly intrude on a person's awareness when they are not focusing on any solution strategy. So an insight could occur when the person is not pursuing that problem, and it would occur to him suddenly. When an insight pointing to a solution occurs while a person is actively engaged in analytical processing but has not reached an impasse, so maybe he is going through the analytical way and the insight might hit him. When a person has a spontaneous realization that does not relate to any explicitly posed problem, or it could be that the person relates to a spontaneous realization and it is maybe not related to the problem, but it would help him solve the problem. We therefore do not consider the breaking of an impasse to be precondition to the insight. So it is not necessary that you break an impasse, you go through reinterpretation and restructuring to gain an insight. Insight could be gained otherwise as well. Thus, there are several potential definitions of insight depending on which combination of feature one selects. So there could be various permutation and combination on the definition of insight. It depends on the combination of features you select for yourself. A positive burst of information, a positive burst of emotion, reinterpretation, restructure. You could take that, you could take something from these types of insights as well. So the definition becomes very broad, and it depends on what features you choose to combine. Very narrowly defined insight could be thought of as a sudden solution to a problem preceded by an impasse and problem restructuring and followed by a positive emotional response. So this is a short definition of insight, that it is a solution to a problem followed by an impasse and preceded. So you arrive to this problem through impasse, solution, problem restructuring, and then there is a positive emotional response. In contrast, the broadest definition of insight is the common non-scientific one, in which an insight is a deep realization, whether sudden or not. So there is a non-scientific definition as a this is definition. This is one definition. There is another definition as well, which is a very broad definition and a non-scientific definition, which says that insight is nothing but a deep realization. It doesn't have to be sudden all the time. Within cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience, inconsistency exists concerning what we consider to be a basic criterion for insight, namely suddenness. For example, several purported insight studies do not specifically isolate and focus on solutions that occurred suddenly. So there are studies which say that it is not necessary that insight would occur suddenly, and there is no fixed definition of insight. There could be multiple definitions of insight. The two they discuss here, there could be others as well. The issue of defining insight is not an exercise of pedantry. So we are not fighting over the definition of insight because just for the sake of gaining knowledge, right? It is not just an intellectual discourse, but it is important. The author will describe how in the next few lines. When insight is defined too broadly, it includes so many diverse, loosely related phenomena that it becomes virtually impossible for researchers to draw general conclusions. Okay, so when you describe insight too broadly, it may include a lot of things, and it would be overwhelming for researchers, and it would be hard for them to draw general conclusion on the basis of it. For example, one recent review of cognitive neuroscience research on creativity and insight lumps together widely diverse studies and characterized by various definitions, assumptions, experimental paradigms, empirical phenomena. You see, they have summed up a lot of things in together. This makes it hard for the readers to comprehend it, to make sense out of it, to draw any general conclusion. Analytical methods and state of the solving process and an inconsistent experimental rigor. Unsurprisingly, because of such indiscriminate agglomeration, that review failed to find much consistency across studies, leading the authors to pronounce a negative verdict on the field. So just because people in the field produces such large broad definition, there is they do not find much consistency in that field. Okay, this is just an example. Cognitive neuroscience is just an example. So just because they have in cognitive neuroscience they involve a lot of things, the readers don't find much consistency in that study, and that is why that leads to a negative verdict on the field of cognitive neuroscience. In contrast, going to the other extreme by adopting an overly narrow definition of insight can lead one to miss important large-scale generalization that cut across particular experimental paradigms. But on the other side, if you go through a short definition, it has its own cons. It leads to a large-scale generalization, and that might not be useful for. It might not be pervasive. It might not be useful to all the fields, right? So there are pros and cons of choosing a long definition, broad definition, and the choosing a very narrow definition. So maybe the author is suggesting that we should go middle of the way. है ना? चलो, moving on to questions. Okay, the passage is primarily concerned with answering which of the following question? Very clear. What is insight? Do we even need to go through other things? The author is talking about insight throughout the passage, right? What is critical characteristics of insight? Critical characteristic, maybe the author is of course discussing some characteristics of insight. But is it all about discussing the characteristics of insight or answering the question that what actually is insight? This is not my answer. What has been the historical understanding has never been discussed. This is also wrong. What are the features of insight? Just the features, not the term insight itself. This is also wrong. If this were to be correct, this also had to be correct, and there cannot be two options. So this could have been eliminated logically as well. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Only A is the correct option. Next question. The issue of defining insight is not an exercise of pedantry. Okay, this is not just for not an intellectual discord. It has application. The author raises each of the following in support of the claim, except all of this support this claim, but one does not. We need to find that option. Broad definition of insight can lead to a lack of consistency across study, making general conclusions difficult. Yes, this is true. Author has said that this is not just about pedantry. We are not doing it just for the sake of gaining knowledge or writing books. It is about that a field has to be defined properly. Otherwise, it would lack consistency across studies, and it would be difficult to make general conclusions. For that, the author also gave example of neuroscience, where they have where they have included a lot of things in that study only. So that has led to inconsistencies, and that people have lost interest in it. A narrow definition of insight can prevent research from recognizing important generalization that apply to different. Yes, we have discussed this pervasive point, right? So this is also true. This is also author has given this as well, that this is not about pedantry. We need to define the definition of insight. It cannot be too broad. It cannot be too narrow. Broad has its difficulties, disadvantages. Narrow has its disadvantages. Scholars who studied insight consider a narrower definition of insight to be invalid, as it does not provide valuable experiment evidence. Yes, this is implied somewhere in the passage that it cannot be applied to all the experiments. The inconsistencies in defining insight within cognitive psychology and neuroscience can affect the focus on solution that occurred suddenly. So this was given as an example, right? Was it the point of discussion in the So this, as I said, was not a point of discussion, but this is, rather than stating the example, this is stating the reason why this example was stated. That because there were a lot of inconsistencies I feel like D is the correct answer. Moving on. All of the following statements may be considered valid inference from the passage, except insights are not confined to specific scenarios or thought processes. Let's keep this. An emotional response is not a necessary component of insight. Yes, this is given. Insight can occur during analytical process. Yes, this is also given. Spontaneous realization validate insight as breaking an impasse. What does this mean? No, the author was saying that insight is not just about breaking an impasse, right? There could be other types of insight as well, where he discussed spontaneous realization, where he discussed other types of realization as well. So this of course cannot be inferred from the passage, and this is my correct option. The author of the passage will most likely agree with which one of the following statements. Studying insights can be enhanced by adopting a middle part definition of insight rather than overly narrow or overly broad definition. Yes, this seems like a good option. A consensus regarding the definition of insight cannot be achieved unless we identify the underlying connection between insights and analytical processing. Has author ever discussed about defining a connection between insights and analytics? No. The solving of verbal puzzle cannot be considered an exercise of insight, as it can be dealt with or without any burst of emotion. No, the author was saying that it is not necessary that insight is always followed by a burst of emotion, not the other way around. That if someone has not experienced a burst of emotion, he hasn't gained an insight, right? It is just the opposite. Someone can gain an insight, and there it is not necessary to be followed by a burst of information. This is wrong. There have been many studies that concluded the problem of restructuring is an important and critical feature of insight. Okay, we are trying to find the one with the author which with the author most likely agree. So is restructuring a critical feature of insight? The author was saying that it is not necessary that we always restructure or reinterpret a problem to gain an insight. It could be gained otherwise as well. So this also is wrong. Hence A is my correct option. So that was the video, guys. I'll see you in the next one.